Aloha and welcome to the G'day Sally Show. I'm Sally Squires, entertaining the world. And tonight I'm reading another story from my book Footsteps to Fairy Forest. And we're up to footstep number 22. Wow. You remember this is about a little girl who finds a map hidden in a rusty jam tin underneath the wood heap in her grandmother's, down behind her grandmother's shed. And she finds a map which has 26 footsteps to Fairy Forest, and every day she goes and finds another footstep. And then as she finds each footstep, she meets another fairy. So today we're at footstep 22. Now that I had met 21 fairies, and they were all such beautiful colours, and as I love to draw and paint, I thought I might try to draw them. I got out all my coloured pencils and a big sheet of paper and started. Now, though I could remember what they looked like in my mind's eye, I found it was not easy to get that down on the paper. First, I thought I should try and remember all their names and write them down. That should help me remember each one. Then, as I drew each fairy, I would try to remember the day I met them and what colours they were. To help me remember all the details, I got out my treasure box from under the stairs and I lined up all the stone footsteps in a row. Then I started at the first one and tried to remember exactly what the fairy looked like. I closed my eyes and imagined walking down the path that first day. That really helped me. And after I'd finished drawing the first fairy, Arcanasia, the fairy of the air, my grandma said it was time for bed. I put some breadcrumbs on my windowsill for Willie Watcher and filled up his bowl of water and went to sleep. Today I'm walking in an east-southeast direction, and the signpost for footstep 22 is something that looks like a butterfly. I am really puzzled by that, but I'm keeping my eyes peeled as I walk. I can't imagine a butterfly just waiting and waiting for me to come along. Butterflies are usually so busy flitting from bush to bush and flower to flower, they hardly stay still for a second. Suddenly I saw a flash of orange on the bark of a tree. And when I went over to see what it was, I could see that a grey gecko was puffing up his orange neck at me. Maybe he was saying hello. As soon as he saw me, he raced down the tree, ran over my left shoe, and scooted off along the path in front of me. I thought I should run after him. I did for a bit, and then I was worried that I would miss the butterfly signpost. So I slowed down and let him get ahead. Then he stopped. And when I reached him, he was standing in the middle of the path, flashing his orange neck again and again. As I looked at him, I could see just under his front feet a shape that looked just like a butterfly. And you'll never guess what it was. It was a seed pod that was shaped just like a butterfly. I thanked the gecko, who had disappeared, and I dug down with my spade. There it was, footstep 22. My heart was pounding as I waited to meet the next fairy. I held the butterfly-shaped seed pod in my hand, and soon I saw a bright red flash, and then the fairy landed right in the middle of the seed pod. She said she was Varanista, the fairy of variety. And do you know she was juggling coloured balls as she sat in the seed pod? And then I fell asleep. So now we're going to hear about Varanista, the fairy of variety. Varanista, the fairy of variety, makes sure that there's always a variety of trees in the forest, a variety of plants in the forest, and a variety of animals and birds in the forest. She knows that variety is the spice of life. That's what makes life interesting. But one morning, when she peeped out the front door of her tiny fairy house, she was shocked by what she saw. During the night, the monotonous monster had made a visit to the forest. He was a very scared monster, and the thing that scared him the most was to see all different kinds of trees and flowers and animals. You see, the monotonous monster wanted everything to look the same. Then he wouldn't feel so scared. Varanista could not believe her eyes. Every tree in the forest looked the same. Every plant and every flower looked the same. And all the birds and bees and butterflies and animals all looked the same. There was just one type of everything. She could not recognize Fairy Forest at all. whatever had happened. And when she tried to wake up the animals, they were all fast asleep. They were so bored with everything being the same that they just could not wake up. The Fairy of Variety knew that she would need some help to work out what had gone wrong in the forest. What had made everything so monotonous, everything the same? Now Varanista, like the other fairies, knew that there was one fairy who could help her find an answer to this terrible predicament, and that was Yesterampta, the meditating fairy. I must go and see Yesterampta at once, thought Varanista. I'm sure she will be able to tell me what has happened to turn the forest into such a monotonous place. She flew as quick as any fairy can fly to the shady glade that led to Yesterampta's green grassy meditation mat. The fairy found her floating above her meditation mat with her eyes firmly shut. She waited, as she did not want to disturb Yesterampta's meditative mood. With her eyes still shut, Yesterampta said, "You are wondering why our fairy forest has lost all its variety, so that it is so monotonous that everyone has gone to sleep and can't wake up, aren't you?" Varanista floated down just next to Yesterampta and nodded her head sadly. "Everything was as it should be last night when I did my last patrol before I went to sleep," she said. "But this morning it has become all monotonous. Every tree is exactly the same as every other tree. Every flower is exactly the same as every other flower. Every bird is exactly the same as every other bird. Every animal is exactly the same as every other animal. Every butterfly and all the insects all look the same. It is terrible," said Varanista. "I've never known this to happen in the forest ever before." Yesterampta kept her eyes shut as she spoke. "I see someone who's very afraid of variety," she said. "It is the monotonous monster. He decided to take a walk from his monotonous forest, and he stumbled upon our forest, and he has cast a dastardly spell to make our forest just like his, monotonous with no variety at all." Varanista stamped her foot. "How dare he change our forest? He has no right to. He should just go back in his forest and stay there," she said. "Dear Yesterampta, will you please project his profile onto that shiny stone over there so that I will recognize him? Then I can go and find him and urge him to leave our forest alone." So Yesterampta, the meditating fairy, projected the image of the monotonous monster onto the shiny stone for Varanista, so she could recognize the terrible monster who had turned fairy forest into such a boring, monotonous place. Varanista flew high up above fairy forest. She got out her bag of extra strong fairy dust and waved over it with her magic fairy wand, which was made of tiny rainbow-coloured fairy balls. Then she said an extra strong spell to turn the forest back into the wonderfully colourful forest full of variety, with many different trees and plants and flowers, and a forest full of many different animals, insects, birds, butterflies and bees. Waving her magic fairy wand and sprinkling the fairy dust over the forest, she said, "Unicorn universe unusual, forest forever full and fantastic, variety varied and various, vim vam vom vem vum." And from her vantage point up high, Varanista, the fairy of variety, could see the forest changing back into its colourful and varied self once more. Once more there was a variety of trees. Once more there was a variety of flowers and plants. Once more there was a variety of animals and butterflies and birds and bees. And after a minute and a second she could see all the creatures waking up, because they were no longer bored with the monotony. Now she had to set about finding that dreadful monotonous monster, to make sure he did not try to make fairy forest monotonous again. But she didn't have to look very far, because she could hear a scream and someone running, and as she got closer, Varanista could see the monotonous monster screaming and holding his hands over his eyes and running right out of fairy forest back to his monotonous forest, never to return. So that's the story of Varanista, the fairy of variety. You know, Hawaii is a microcosm of the world, with people here from all over the world. And Noa Hawaii is a microcosm of the traditional arts of the world, with beautiful patterns from many countries. They've been in business for more than 40 years with wonderful Hawaii-designed batik clothing. Their hand-dyed and handmade clothes have patterns that are based on traditional kapa and tapa designs from Hawaii, Polynesia, Micronesia, Indonesia, even New Zealand and Africa. So check out the wonderful items that Noa Noa has on their website, www.noanoahawaii.com.